Good evening, everybody. This is Cinnamon Noir. And welcome back to Deltarune, Chapter 2. You get a chapter select at this point, even though there's not much point. You can only play the one. But I guess this is sort of future-proofing. There's an interesting little laugh right there. We'll later find out who makes it. So yes, another file screen. Another very interesting and unique file screen theme, which I appreciate. One thing about Toby Fox is that he loves leitmotifs. He finds an interesting way to reuse one basic theme a lot of different ways. This is actually the same exact melody as the one that the other theme was based on, the other file select theme. But it sounds completely different because of what he puts around it. Well, I guess we're going to figure out what happened at the end of Chapter 1. And it's sitcom level. So yeah, this isn't definitive, but it does kind of seem like the way the cliffhanger is resolved is that Chris was just taking out the knife and grinning evilly because he was going to eat a whole pie on his own in the middle of the night. It's really going to spoil his digestion. I mean, he's a growing boy. But whatever. I'm not sure if you had the option to take your brother's $5 in the first chapter, but either way, that's something I'd never do. There's some evil things I'd consider doing, but not that. I mean, that's just senseless evil. It's interesting that your brother is mentioned, while I don't think, as far as I can tell, your brother is ever described at any point. That's probably going to come up later. I mean, the fact that you clearly have a brother, but your brother's not around, is something that you'd think Toriel will eventually mention. Just a heads up, I'm not going to be checking a lot of items like over and over again all through this Let's Play. I'm going to try to keep it pretty low-key. So yeah, it is not time to wash our hands yet. We will discover at the end of this chapter that is the time to wash our hands. But now is clearly the time to flush the toilet, because we get rewarded for it with a little jingle. So just like in Chapter 1, Toriel is actually already outside waiting to take us to school in her car. I don't know if you recall, but Toriel is actually the elementary school teacher at the school that Chris goes to. So the other students all know who she is. So unlike Chapter 1, it actually skips straight to Chris going into the classroom once you get to school. Kind of abbreviates that section, I suppose, because there's going to be less emphasis on it in this chapter. Well, Susie actually showed up on time for the first time in probably forever. And she says it's because she was expecting us to be here. Friendship. So yeah, that's Noelle on the top left, the deer, I think she is. And then in the middle, of course, we have Birdley, who's the smug jagoff I mentioned from the first chapter. But in this chapter, he actually is a major character. So his jackassery is actually going to be important. It's going to be relevant. There's a weird quasi-Charles Dickens reference in this. And then Chris does something very strange. He sleeps through an entire day of class. I suppose it's because of everything that happened yesterday, he can't sleep very well. That's actually a little bit like Persona, where you go to school during the day and then at night you fight demonic monsters with your posse of magical kids. But we'll actually find out pretty soon that there are some pretty strong connections between this game and Persona. It touches on a lot of the same kinds of themes. So I'm just fooling around here a little bit. I took a little time to get up to speed replaying this game. You know, just like I wanted to relearn the mechanics by replaying the final boss, I also wanted to relearn, you know, just this game's sense of flavor text and stuff like that, but it's not very important. Now this is important. So yeah, it turns out Susie couldn't get any sleep either. It's all very exciting. It's worth noting, because this is going to be relevant later, that Chris and Susie both seem to remember what happened to them yesterday, which we're later going to find out is interesting, because other people don't necessarily remember that. But of course Susie wants to go right back into the closet. Because, really, I mean, if you could go to Narnia whenever you wanted, you'd never spend time at boring old school. Oh, but who should interrupt but Noelle? Now, of course, her name is obviously pretty Christmassy. Oddly enough, this whole thing is this whole chapter is kind of a Christmassy subtext to it, which is a little confusing, especially given that they already had Snowdin in Undertale, which is like the most Christmassy place imaginable. So this is your first choice / kind of non-choice in the game. You can either say we were engaged in crime, which isn't even true. I don't know why you would lie in a way that makes you look bad. But yeah, we were hanging out in a closet, and I'm just going to be totally upfront about that. So yeah, Noelle is kind of interested in Susie. We're going to get a lot of development on this. Arguably a little too much. I think this is one aspect of this chapter where Toby Fox goes way overboard. But that's kind of his thing. Yeah, enough waiting around. Let's go to another dimension. And of course this time it just instantly works. Because they know what they're doing. I keep forgetting that Susie's hair changes color when they go to the other world. I mean, really, everybody's hair changes color, but it's more prominent with Susie. Yeah, this is a little ominous. There's no people here. Except Ralsei, because there's always Ralsei. Oh, Ralsei. Yeah, where the heck is Lancer? Also known as the best character in this whole damn game. So I had already figured out at this point, and I don't claim any credit for this because it's really obvious, that when we sealed up the Dark Fountain, we basically destroyed the Dark World that was in there. One of the reasons why the Darkness wanted to stop us from doing this is because I think they kind of anticipated that if we got rid of it, their whole world would be destroyed. This is similar to the theme in Undertale, where even though the game is about pacifism and trying to find a way to get everybody to get along, the implication with your need to get out of the underground and break through the barrier is that you need to hurt somebody to get what you want. So someone is going to have to suffer at some point. In Deltarune, I think this theme is even more stressed because of the nature of the Dark Worlds. And the fact that this isn't like a practical difference. You do need to stop the Dark Fountains from flowing, and if you do, these Dark Worlds will be destroyed. This game has kind of a curious way of getting around that, though, which we're seeing with this, where we bring all this junk into the main Dark World, which is where Ralsei lives. And when we do that, the characters suddenly come back. Because this is a Dark World, so they can live. And the best character ever is back. I love that high five. Probably my favorite animation in this entire chapter. I guess that's just because Susie and Lancer are my favorite characters, period. So yeah, Ralsei lays it down. Lancer also seems to know what's going on, which is a little sad, actually. And of course, that guy in the bottom right Tulk's Card, or whatever his name is. He's back, unfortunately. I wish we could have left him behind. So Ralsei mentions that the reason that these people are still around is because we spared them. If we had killed them in the Dark World, the artifact that represented them would have been destroyed in the real world, which would of course mean that we couldn't have picked it up in the other room and brought it here. This is a theme that's going to become pretty prominent in this game. You either get rid of enemies, or you spare them, in which case you're able to sort of recruit them and bring them here. There is a curious thing where Ralsei says that the dark characters can live here because this is the biggest dark fountain. It has enough energy to support them all. But surely if you have to get rid of the dark fountains, you have to get rid of all of them. Which means someday all of the Darkners, which may include Ralsei, will have to be destroyed. That's something that's probably going to be put off until the end, if I know anything about the way stories work. But if you already anticipate it, which I'm definitely anticipating it, it is kind of a disturbing concept that all of the characters you meet, besides the ones in the real world, may eventually disappear. So this is Sham. Fairly important character, actually, in Deltarune. I'm not a big fan of him, but, you know, whatever. Toby Fox creates so many different kinds of characters. I feel like it's almost inevitable that you're going to like some and dislike others. And I think that's true for everybody. For instance, I really like Burger Pants from Undertale, but on the other hand, I don't like Metaton. This is just sort of the way things go. So once again, we have this weird flavor text in save points. But another thing that's new here is that when you recruit these enemies, you can now see them, and you have this sort of bestiary, which I'm always a sucker for that in video games. I love this kind of thing. It's got the little flavor text there. It's got animations, which is also just great. I appreciate it when games take the effort to put in little things like this that most people aren't going to spend much time on. But they're nice little bonuses. It's like a game having a sound test, which is another thing I really appreciate. So yeah, this is your hub for the rest of the game. You can come back here and shop anytime you like, which is good because it means you can get basic healing items and the like. You can engage in training for like bonus challenges to get more money and stuff like that. It's actually a fairly well fleshed out hub world for the kind of simple RPG that Deltarune is. It's not necessary though, and I actually don't use it at all throughout the rest of this chapter. But it's always there. So of course I gotta go down into the living quarters for bad guys. I don't know what the little Chuckers chip is doing there though, because he's a good guy. At least as far as I can tell. But of course who we do have from here is the king. So yeah, effectively the king's attitude is better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. Just a little glint of humanity there. Yeah, I believe that. I totally believe that if he'd thrown Lancer off of the edge, Lancer would have just bounced. Lancer goes through all kinds of weird stuff, and Susie also did, if you recall, jump on his head in Chapter 1, which just created a squishing sound and doesn't seem to have affected him at all. Definitely, if Lancer was going to get any brain damage, he's probably already received it. So yeah, this is something Ralsei built for us, I guess, in a day, which is a little unusual. Not even a day, actually, because he did it overnight, and we'd spent most of the day in the Dark World. But yeah, Ralsei is just... he's a little too cute and generous. It's almost to the point where it's suspicious, like Toby Fox wants you to doubt Ralsei's motives. But I'm gonna take it on faith for now. Obviously, if we get to Chapter 6 and Ralsei turns out to be like the final or penultimate boss, I'm gonna be very surprised. And Lancer gets a room that, as far as I can tell, is exactly the same as the room that he lived in earlier. Except now he has a bed. That's a little callback. If you recall from the end of Chapter 1, when we went to Lancer's room, there was in fact his bicycle on the bed. He loves that bike, even though he set it on fire. I guess it's kind of a love-hate relationship. And there's Chris's room, which is actually kind of like just a mirror-swapped version of Susie's room. I find it interesting that in both of these cases, the sides of the room are invisible. Like, you can see decorations that extend beyond the apparent limit of the room. I think that's a deliberate stylistic choice. There's a room in Luigi's Mansion, actually, that works that way, and I think there were at least a couple rooms in Undertale that work that way. Certainly when you sit down with Napstablook and listen to his music, the walls of the room disappear and you can see all of those little astronomical details around you. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, it's time to leave. We have Chapter 2 to do. I mean, this isn't even properly Chapter 2. Really, this should have been called the recap episode. So yeah, once Ralsei finds out we have homework to do, he gets real tough. And Lancer decides to go with us. Which, I'm not sure if that's the greatest idea. I'm not even sure if he can survive outside in the real world. But what the hell, Lancer is too stupid to have second thoughts about a thing like this. I wasn't afraid of that, man. Roolk's card is the annoying dog of this game. We'll always have Lancer, Susie. So yes, it's down to the library, which has a computer lab. I guess this school doesn't have its own computer lab? I am going to confess that just like Chapter 1, I actually read a little bit about Chapter 2 before playing it. That's just kind of what I do, to spoil myself. Oh, by the way, a little disturbing thing here. In the real world, Ralks and Lancer are just stuff. So in your key items, when you look, you just see them as stuff. But anyway, yeah, apparently the school doesn't have a computer lab. Instead, we have to use the computer lab at the local library. Or librarby, as it's called for, as far as I can tell, absolutely no reason. You know, I would think even Toriel would eventually get sick of butterscotch-flavored things. I mean, it's kind of like bacon-flavored things. Doesn't it eventually just get old? Horrible. Dog driving is a scourge in this nation. But yeah, if you were thinking you were going to check out the rest of this hub town and see how it's changed since Chapter 1, since the end of Chapter 1, you can't. This traffic jam is deliberately represented so that you can't see it. I don't know if that's because Toby Fox hasn't quite worked out yet how to make the overworld change between chapters, or if this is just deliberate and they want to really focus on getting you into the computer lab. So Susie is having trouble mustering up the enthusiasm for doing the project. Not surprising, considering she's probably never done her homework before in her life. Oh. That music sure seems familiar. Well then. I don't know why I stood so long on this particular moment. That's right. I think it's absolutely necessary for the completion of our homework that we screw around in the Dark World for a while. But yeah, you can always say we can use the computer at my house and be boring, but I'm not going to be boring. For all I know, Chris is boring, but I'm not. So here we go. And at first glance, oh, very similar to the last Dark World. But we'll figure that out in the next episode. See you later, everybody.